Good morning to you, Shanker.
Good morning.
It's starting to look a bit messy, tariffs, from this perspective. What do you foresee is going to happen in this week?
Right, this is, as you said, this is going to be a big week. Wednesday, April 2nd, is the date where there was an executive order in February which basically asked the agencies in the US that asked the agencies to look at unfair trade and reciprocal tariffs. So, in other words, tariffs based on regulatory and other trade barriers in foreign markets. So that report is being put together by the US trade representatives, and it'll land on the president's desk on April the 2nd, on Wednesday. It will have, pretty substantial entries for a number of the G20 countries, and based on that, what we can expect is a tariff based on those trade barriers and regulatory barriers and so forth. The auto tariff was announced last week, is scheduled to go in between April the 3rd and May the 3rd. And it is based on a slightly different set of parameters. It's based on the national security section, what's called Section 232, which is the provision on national security. So he's essentially saying that the surge of autos into the US is a national security issue in the US.
Okay.
Now, Section 232 is used pretty with abandon often. The reason it's used is because that's your automatic defence to any WTO action, is you're doing it under national security concerns. It also enables him to do more things than he would have to get congressional support for. So you can expect that the auto tariff will go in, but there will be a series of other tariffs on Wednesday, and I think the EU, obviously China, to some extent the UK, Japan, others will be hit by large tariffs.
Can I ask, Shanker, because to me you're in a very good position here as a former vice of both UK trade and US trade. So what is the best way for a nation to respond? I mean, at the moment, Canada's sort of talking up a sort of more hawkish game. The EU definitely quite dovish, and I'm not entirely sure what the UK's. I think we're more dove than hawk in the UK. I'm not sure with President Trump being dovish is going to get us anywhere.
Well, I think my advice to any country is, first of all, you've got to look at what the underlying reason for the tariff is, and they're very, very different. So the initial range of tariffs that were imposed on Canada and Mexico were really about fentanyl production. And in fact, the Mexicans responded to that by doing some things in the fentanyl area. The Canadians said it was a trade war. And so US administration officials had to go on the media and say, you're not answering the question. The question's about fentanyl. So it's really important that you answer the question. What's going to happen is all countries are going to have all these tariffs because of unfair trade and regulatory barriers and all these other things. If you can, and there will also be an opportunity for a deal. I mean, let's remember that President Trump is ultimately a deal maker. If you can answer, each country will have, anywhere between 10, 15, 20 and 100 things that the US is complaining about. And they're not going to be surprises because they've been in the what's called the National Trade Estimate, the estimate of trade barriers, for decades. So it's not going to be a big surprise what your list is. What you need to do is say to the US, look, we're prepared to deal and we're prepared to look at a certain number of those things. I mean, you don't need to solve everything, but you need to show willing to solve some of the things. And I think then the president will switch from being in, big tariff mode to being in deal mode. Right. And when he's in deal mode, and the good thing for the UK is that he's obviously predisposed to do a deal with the UK. He's been talking about it a lot. The Prime Minister had a very good meeting with him in the Oval Office that was a good first step in that whole process. So, if the UK does that and starts to look like we are able to move on some of the key US concerns, and again, you don't have to move on everything. You just have to show that you're willing to move on some things. Then I think there's a possibility of a deal being done, which is, I think, very important to the UK economy because. So we're doing okay. We're in your opinion, we're in the UK. We're pretty much on the right track at the moment. I think we are. I think we have to be realistic about the complaints that the US has against us. I mean, we've heard that the government is willing to look at things like the digital sales tax. They're willing to look at some other things. I think you have to be willing to look at everything. That doesn't mean you have to do everything in the context of a deal, but you can't say we're going to take all this off the table, because I think that will cause the reason these things are problems for the US is not because President Trump has invented them. It's because US industry has complained about them for a long time.
I'm really indebted to you, because it seems a very fair and balanced appraisal. May I ask, it's been suggested today that the UK should consider some reciprocal type tariffs, and one that caught my eye, because for an entirely different reason, actually, on a health basis, was tariffs on junk food, on American junk food. And maybe it's wrong to pick on one in isolation. I can see there's an argument for making junk food more expensive generally, but I just wonder what your thoughts would be, how the US might respond to any attempt to make, the Big Mac more expensive.
Yeah, you see, I mean, I think anything to do with food, agriculture, or what's called SPS goods, the goods that are subject to regulations in sanitary, what's called sanitary and phytosanitary, which is plant and animal health kind of regulations, that will be a red rag to the bull. Right. So if you do that, you're going to go down, pretty hard, because let's remember 90% of farmers in the US voted for President Trump. So there's no way there's going to not be some sort of agricultural component to this deal. But again, that doesn't mean you have to give away the store. It just means that that needs to be a subject.
Shanker, I really appreciate your counsel. I personally found it fascinating listening to you, and it will be intriguing to see how things progress. But that notion of the trade deal, not an all-encompassing trade deal, but some kind of a deal, does seem to be very much in the forefront or forethinking of many of our heavier newspapers today. Shanker Singham, thank you. You're listening to Matthew Wright on LBC.